The wind screamed across Bear Creek Ridge, like the cry of forgotten souls, lost in the endless white. A tall silhouette stood amid the blizzard, rifle raised, eyes cutting through the snow-choked pines. Through the swirling storm, a lone log cabin emerged, its chimney smoke whipped backward by the gale. Inside, weak firelight wavered across rough timber walls. The man sat rigid on a crude wooden chair, both hands clamped tightly around the rifle resting across his thighs. 3 small calves pressed close behind him, shivering with every gust that rattled the walls. He did not blink. His ears strained past the wind and distant wolf howls. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, trudging through deep snow toward the cabin door. The wooden door shuddered once. Then came a long, trembling breath. Slipping through the narrow crack beneath it, the man's grip tightened on the rifle until his knuckles turned white. His eyes narrowed to hard slits. He rose slowly, boots scraping against the plank floor. His hand closed around the heavy iron latch, veins standing out. The door rattled again, harder this time. The mountain didn't care. That was the thing Eli Brannock had learned in 6 years of living on it. The mountain didn't care if you were grieving, didn't care if your boots were worn through at the heel, didn't care if you rode out into a late April blizzard without buttoning your coat all the way up. It just kept going. Snow fell. Wind cut. The pines bent low and snapped back up like they always did, and Eli rode. Copper moved slow beneath him. The old horse knew these trails better than Eli did at this point. Knew which rocks hid under the drifts, which slopes turned mean after a fresh fall. Eli let him pick the way, kept his hands loose on the reins. Let his mind go wherever it wanted to go, which was nowhere good. It never was. Not anymore. He was supposed to be checking the trap lines. 3 sets he'd laid out along the eastern ridge before the storm hit. Fox, mostly. Maybe a coyote if he was unlucky. He didn't particularly need the pelts, didn't particularly need much of anything these days. But the traps gave him a reason to be out here in the cold, instead of sitting inside the cabin staring at the wood stove until his eyes went dry. Movement was better than stillness. That much he'd figured out. 6 years of figuring that out. He pulled Copper up at the ridge overlook. The valley spread out below him, white and gray and pale blue, where the creek still ran somewhere under the ice. Coldwater was down there, 8 miles by road. Less if you knew the cuts through the timber. He hadn't been in 8 weeks, maybe 9. Doc Fenn had sent word up with the Hadley boy in February. Something about a prescription. Something about come in and let me look at that shoulder. Eli had sent the boy back with 2 dressed rabbits and a note that said he was fine. He was not fine, but he was functional. And at this point in his life, functional was what he had to offer. The mountain asked nothing more. It didn't grade on feeling. It graded on showing up, doing the work, not dying. Eli had been passing that test for 6 years. Some days that was enough. Most days it wasn't. But he kept doing it anyway. Because what else was there? Because Vera would have told him to. Because Danny, but he didn't go there. Not on the ridge in the cold. Not when there was work still to do. Copper shifted under him. Ears forward. Ellie felt it a second later. Something wrong in the air. Not wrong like weather wrong. He knew that feeling well enough. Had spent 4 years as a wilderness scout reading the sky and the ground and the spaces between things. This was different. Quieter. The particular. Kind of quiet that meant something had already happened. Something that couldn't be undone. He gave Copper his heels, and they moved down off the ridge. He smelled it before he saw it blood. Under the snow smell. Iron and cold and something else. The raw animal heat of something recently alive going absent. You didn't mistake that smell once you'd learned it. It sat in the back of your throat and stayed there. Copper slowed on his own. Stopped at the edge of a small clearing, where 3 spruce trees grew close together, and the ground dipped into a natural shelter out of the wind. Smart horse. He'd known before Eli did. The cow was there, on her side. Already half covered in drifting snow, the white accumulating fast across her black and white markings. Black baldy, big framed. She'd been a good animal, you could see that even now. Strong shoulders, wide through the hips, deep barrel. The kind of cow a serious rancher bred carefully and kept close and didn't lose without knowing why. Ellie sat for a moment. Looking, then he got down off Copper. He tied the reins to a low branch. Copper wasn't going anywhere, but habit was habit, and walked around to the other side of the cow. Slowly, reading the ground as he went. The snow had drifted, but hadn't completely obliterated the story. She hadn't fallen here. She'd walked here, or been pushed here, which was different. He came around to her left side, and stopped. There it was, just below the left shoulder. Small entry wound, clean edges, not torn. The snow around it pale pink where it had melted from the body heat, and then refrozen when the heat was gone. Not a wolf bite, not exposure, a bullet. He crouched down, looked closer, pressed 2 fingers near the wound without touching it. Not that it mattered now, but the habit was old and deep. He'd spent 4 years as a wilderness scout, reading landscape and reading ground. You didn't stop doing that just because you'd stopped being paid for it. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget. The angle was wrong for a mercy shot, wrong for anything accidental. The shot had come from elevation, from the northeast, at close range. This animal had been shot deliberately and left to die slowly in a spring blizzard by someone who either didn't care or who specifically wanted her dead and suffering, and far from anywhere she'd be found quickly. He stayed crouched for a long moment, thinking. Then he heard it small, thin, almost swallowed by the wind, which was picking up and now, pushing snow sideways through the clearing in cold gray sheets. A sound that shouldn't have been there. He stood and moved around the carcass carefully, and that's when he saw them. Pressed tight against the dead cow's belly, instinctively seeking the warmth that was no longer there. 3 of them, newborn, couldn't have been more than a few hours old, maybe a day at the outside, still wet at the ears, eyes barely open, legs folded under them in that boneless way that newborns had, like the joints hadn't quite decided to work yet, like they were still figuring out what having a buddy meant. 3 calves, alive barely, the largest one, reddish-brown, built heavy even this small, which would turn into something significant if it lived long enough. Had its nose tucked under the dead cow's foreleg, still looking for what was no longer there. The smallest was making the sound he'd heard, a weak, reedy cry that kept starting and stopping, like it wasn't sure it had the energy to finish, like it was asking a question it wasn't sure anyone was listening to. The third lay between them, dark-colored, very still, watching Eli with eyes that were too calm for something that small, not the blankness of shutdown. Something more deliberate, like it was waiting to see what happened next, before it decided anything. Eli didn't move for a long time. The snow came down around him. Copper stood back and waited. Don't. That was the first thought, clear and immediate and completely sensible. Don't do this. You know what this is. You know what this becomes. You've already buried everything you loved once, and you know precisely what it costs. Not just the grief itself, but the years afterward. The shape your life takes when you try to build a wall around yourself high enough that nothing can get through again. You are 53 days away from making it through an entire winter without breaking down in front of the wood stove, which is the longest streak you've had, and you have a system, and the system is working well enough, and you are not going to walk back in there with 3 newborn calves that might not survive the night and do this to yourself again. You know better, the small one cried again, shorter this time. Like it was running out of something, like it had asked the question twice now, and was deciding whether to bother asking a third time. Eli unbuttoned his coat. He didn't make a decision exactly. It wasn't that deliberate. It was more like his hand started doing something, and the rest of him caught up. 2 or 3 beats later, already committed, he pulled the coat off. Felt the cold hit him immediately, hard and clean and honest, the way the mountain was always honest about what it was. He got down on his knees in the snow next to the calves. The smallest one flinched when he reached for it. Some reflex still working, some ancient animal understanding that the world was dangerous and large things moving fast meant harm. Easy, he said. His voice came out strange, rough from not being used much. He hadn't spoken to anyone in almost 3 weeks. He'd forgotten what his own voice sounded like outside his own head. Easy. I've got you. He wrapped the coat around the smallest one first, lifted it against his chest. It weighed almost nothing, just bones and new skin and the fierce, biological insistence of something that had just arrived in the world and wasn't ready to leave it yet. It was shaking so hard he could feel it through the wool, every muscle in its small body working just to stay warm enough to keep going. Then the dark one. Then the big red one. That one fought him a little, legs scrambling, a sound halfway between a cry and something more indignant like. It already had opinions about how things should go, and being lifted by a stranger wasn't among them. Yeah, Eli said. I know. He got them bundled as best he could. Walked them back to Copper one at a time, which meant 3 separate trips through the snow. Getting 3 newborn calves onto a horse alone in a blizzard was not a graceful process. It was cold and awkward and logistically impractical, and twice he nearly went down in the snow himself. But Copper stood dead still through all of it. Patient old horse. He'd seen things in his years with Eli. He understood when the situation required stillness. And he provided it, best thing Eli owned. Not that there was much competition. When it was done, calves draped across the saddle, his coat wrapped around them. Eli walking beside because there wasn't room for him too. He looked back once at the dead cow in the clearing. The snow was covering her fast. Another hour and she'd be just a shape under the white. By morning, nothing. I'm sorry. To her, to the clearing, to the mountain that didn't care. Then he turned and walked. He thought briefly about the 8 miles to Coldwater, then dismissed it. Too far in this cold. Too long for calves this new. The cabin was closer. 2 miles, maybe a little more. He could do 2 miles. He put his head down and walked into the wind. The cabin was cold when he got back. He'd let the fire go low before heading out. No reason to heat a space nobody was in. That was how Eli thought now, in those terms. Space nobody was in. As if the cabin's purpose was just storage for his absence. He got the calves inside first, laid them on the braided rug in front of the wood stove, still wrapped in his coat. Then he built the fire up fast with the dry wood he kept by the door. You always kept dry wood by the door. That was mountain living basics, the kind of thing you learned before anything else. Then he stood in the middle of the room and thought, okay, milk, bottles, something to keep them warm while the fire caught up. Those were the immediate problems. Everything else, the bullet wound, the dead cow, who shot her, and why, what he was supposed to do with 3 newborn calves he had no business taking in. All of that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight was about keeping them alive. One thing at a time. The dried milk was in the back of the pantry behind a jar of last fall's apple butter and some canned beans he'd been meaning to use for months. He found the bottles in a box under the workbench, still clean, left over from the winter 2 years ago when a neighbor's goat had rejected her kid and he'd ended up babysitting the thing for 11 days. He got the smallest pot out, filled it with water, set it on the stove. While it heated, he went back to the calves. The smallest one was still shaking, eyes half closed now, which scared him more than the crying had. The crying meant fight, and fight was what you wanted to see. Silence and stillness in a newborn was different. He got down next to her and rubbed her sides with both hands. Friction, warmth, circulation, come on. The dark one had gotten itself partially upright, front legs extended, trying. Its eyes were fully open now, watching him with that measuring quality he'd noticed in the clearing. The red one was also watching him, those alert eyes taking everything in. Give me 10 minutes. Eli told the red one. It blinked, deliberate, like it was acknowledging the timeline. He got back to the stove, mixed the dried milk with the warm water. Not too hot, checked the temperature on the inside of his wrist, the way he vaguely remembered from some long, Ago animal husbandry training that had seemed theoretical at the time, and now felt very practical. Filled the first bottle. Getting a newborn calf to take a bottle is not intuitive. They don't automatically understand what it is. They want the real thing, the real warmth, the real smell, the real comfort of their mother. And when you give them something that isn't that, They don't always know what to do with it. Eli knew this in theory. He discovered it in practice when the smallest calf turned her face away from the nipple. Once, twice, 3 times. Come on, turn. Away, please, away. He tried a different approach. Put a little of the warm milk on his fingers, held them near her nose, and let her smell it. Let her mouth at his fingers, tentative at first, uncertain, her tongue moving against his skin in that new clumsy way, and then, slowly moved the bottle in while she was still tasting. Still engaged with the idea, the calf latched, started drinking. It was such a small thing, a newborn animal eating from a bottle in a cold cabin on a mountain. Eli had seen cattle born dozens of times over the years, had helped with difficult deliveries, had done all the practical, unglamorous work of working with large animals. This should have been ordinary to him. He had to stop for a second, just a second. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and looked at the ceiling, and waited until his throat stopped doing whatever it was doing. Counted the beams. 5 beams. He'd put them up himself 6 years ago when he'd built the cabin, and counting them had become a way of steadying himself on the nights that got bad. 5. He was here. He was okay. He kept going. He fed the smallest one first. She drank weakly but steadily. More than he'd expected considering. Then the dark one, who had gotten himself upright by the time Eli got to him and drank with more confidence, watching Eli's face the whole time. Then the red one, who grabbed the nipple, like he'd been waiting for exactly this, and was personally offended by the delay. By the time all 3 were fed, Eli's knees ached from crouching on the floor, and the fire had turned the cabin warm, and the blizzard outside was building towards something serious. He could hear it in the stovepipe, that low harmonic moan that meant the storm had found its depth and wasn't moving on any time soon. He looked at the 3 calves arranged on his rug. They looked back at him. The red one sneezed. Right, Eli said. He got the old horse blanket from the trunk at the foot of his bed. Thick wool, smelled of copper, which seemed appropriate, and folded it double on the floor near the stove. Moved the calves onto it, one by one. Got them settled against each other for warmth. Watched them for a while to make sure they were breathing right. That their color was coming back in their gums and ears. That the shaking was slowing down. It was. Slowly, but it was. He pulled the chair over from the table and sat down next to them. He didn't plan to stay long. He was wet through from the snow, and he needed dry clothes and something hot to eat and some sleep. All of that was true. But he found himself just sitting there in the firelight watching these 3 impossibly small creatures breathe. The dark one had its eyes fully open now, watching him right back with that particular stillness, that quality of paying attention without broadcasting anything. The smallest had fallen asleep mid-breath, just dropped off like a switch had been thrown. One ear folded under in a way that looked uncomfortable, but apparently wasn't. Her sides rose and fell with a steadiness that hadn't been there an hour ago. The red one kept trying to get his front legs under him. He'd get them positioned, almost there, and then something would shift and he'd be back down. Fail, try again, fail. Try again, not with any frustration. Just with the pure insistence of something that had decided this was what was happening next. Don't quit, Eli thought. Looking at him. Just don't quit. He reached out and touched the red one's side. Felt the heartbeat under his palm, fast and small, and absolutely certain. Like it had no doubt at all that tomorrow was coming, and it intended to be there for it. He thought about names then. Not because he meant to keep them. He was realistic about what this was, or he was trying to be. He'd feed them through the night, get them stable, figure out in the morning what to do next. There were ranchers around who sometimes took on orphan calves. Doc Fenn might know someone. He could make calls when the storm broke, but they needed names in the meantime. Just to call them something. Just so he could talk to them without saying, hey, you or the small one. Names were practical. That was all the red one. Still working at the problem of his front legs with focused, unhurried determination, had a look about him. Stubborn, confident, like he'd decided early what the shape of things was going to be and was simply implementing the plan. Vera had a word for people like that. She used to say it about Eli, which, in hindsight, was either very fond or very exasperated, probably depending on the day and what specifically he'd dug in about. Roan, he thought, for the color, for the way he moved already, like he owned whatever space he occupied. The dark one. Still. Watchful. There was something about the way it held itself. That careful attention, the way its eyes tracked everything without broadcasting alarm or anxiety, like it was taking notes and would act on them when the time was right. Shade, and the small one, sleeping now with that folded ear. She'd fought so hard to eat, shaking the whole time, barely able to hold her head up, and then just crashed completely the second she was done. Like she'd burned through every reserve she had, and trusted completely that she was safe now. Pip, because Danny had been 4 years old and had called every small thing Pip. The smaller the thing, the more certainly it needed the name. A chipmunk on the back fence, a spare button he found on the floor, a tiny crabapple from the tree in the yard. Hey, a Pip. Look, Dad, a Pip. Ellie sat very still. He hadn't let himself think about Danny's voice in months. He tried not to. Not because the memory was bad, because it was so precisely, specifically good that it went through him like something sharp passing through something soft, and the aftermath of that took a while to recover from. He sat with it, let it be there. Didn't push it away. Just sat with it in the firelight, with the wind howling outside and 3 small animals breathing softly on the blanket at his feet. Nobody's leaving tonight, he said quietly. He wasn't entirely sure who he was talking to. He didn't sleep. He meant to. He sat in the chair with every intention of sleeping, and then Pip would start shivering again and he'd be up rubbing her sides. And by the time she was settled, Roan would start fussing, and then there was another feeding. And then he remembered there was a second box of dried milk in the barn. He'd bought it 18 months ago and never used it, which meant getting dressed again and going out in the dark and the blizzard, holding the lantern low and moving fast, back before his body temperature dropped too far. He found the second box. Also found a bag of electrolyte powder. Doc Fenn had sent up the previous spring for copper, who'd gotten into something he shouldn't have. Different species, but the principle was the same. Hydration mattered. Electrolytes mattered. He mixed a small amount into the next round of feedings and felt better about his odds. He slept a little around 4. Must have, because he startled awake at 6 to pale gray light, coming through the single east-facing window and all 3 calves standing, shakily, improbably, but standing in a loose cluster around his chair. Shade had his head on Eli's knee. Roan was investigating the leg of the chair with that systematic focus he seemed to apply to everything. Pip was looking at him from about 6 inches away, that small face directly level with his, ears slightly forward, expression completely unreadable in the way that new creatures' expressions were. You couldn't tell yet what they meant, so you projected meaning onto them, which was probably a mistake, but also probably unavoidable. Eli looked at Pip. Pip looked at Eli. He should call someone, he thought. Today, when the storm broke, he'd call Doc Fenn and figure out the next step. He'd figure something out. He did not call Doc Fenn. Not that day. Not the next. He told himself he was waiting until the blizzard broke, which was true enough. 4 days of serious mountain weather. The kind that came through once every few years and took the phone lines down and made the road into cold water impassable even with chains. The satellite phone only worked when there wasn't heavy weather between him and the sky. So he waited, and while he waited, he fed them every 4 to 5 hours. He moved them from the rugza to a small penny built in the corner of the cabin, from leftover 2x4s. Nothing elegant, just enough to give them a contained space to sleep in while he slept. He got straw from the barn for bedding. He found old hand towels and rubbed them down after each, feeding the way their mother would have, which helped their circulation, and also, he'd read somewhere, their neurological development, their sense of being known, being recognized as individuals in a world that otherwise had no particular interest in their individual survival. He found himself rubbing them down longer than was strictly necessary. By the 3rd day, they were stronger, By the fourth, they were finding their legs. Literally, standing for longer periods, the coordination improving hour by hour, the way newborn coordination did, that steep early learning curve. Roan had already demonstrated a tendency to test everything structural within his reach. Shade watched. Pip slept more than the other two, compensating for the difficult start. But she was nursing steadily, and her color was good, and she had a way of finding Eli's exact location in the cabin at any given moment, and positioning herself within arm's reach of it. The storm broke on day 5. Blue sky, cold but clear. The mountain dazzling white in every direction, like everything had been washed and set out to dry. Eli stood on the porch in the morning stillness with a cup of coffee and thought, today. I'll go down today. Shade came and stood next to him, just stood there, pressed its dark side against Eli's leg and looked out at the mountain with that watchful attention, like it was learning the view. Don't. Eli said. Shade did not move. You're not helping. He went back inside. Made the call. Told Doc Fenn he needed to come down and talk. The road to Coldwater took almost 2 hours with the snow still deep on the lower switchbacks. Eli went on copper rather than the truck. Easier through the drifts, and honestly he needed the time the ride gave him. The calves were 5 days old now, strong enough to be left for a few hours. He'd penned them securely and left water and the last pan of warm milk substitute. He told himself 3 times on the way down that they'd be fine. Roan had head-butted him this morning with enough force to actually sting, which in Eli's experience was a sign of good health and terrible manners, and he was unreasonably pleased about both. Doc Fenn's office was on Souvenir Street of Coldwater, in the same building it had occupied for 30 years. Same bell on the door when you pushed it. Same framed photograph of the elk range on the waiting room wall. Doc Fenn himself was 72, and moved like a man who'd long ago decided that hurrying was for people with somewhere more important to be than wherever he currently was. He looked Eli up and down when he came in, the look of a man who'd known you for 20 years and had opinions about what he saw. You look terrible, Doc said. Thanks, how's the shoulder? Fine, Doc pulled a stool over and settled onto it. He didn't believe the answer, but he also knew Eli well enough to know that pressing it wouldn't get him anywhere useful. You got my note. Got your note. The rabbits were good. Good. A pause. The bell on the door of the hardware store next door rang as someone came or went. Outside, the ordinary life of a small mountain town on a clear morning after a storm. Snow being shoveled, a truck running at idle. 2 women talking on the corner across the street. So, Doc said. 3 calves. Ellie looked up. Hadley boy saw you on the road 5 days back. Said you had something wrapped up in your coat across the horse. Doc tilted his head. Wasn't hard to guess, given the general shape of things. Ellie was quiet. They make it? Yeah, Eli said. They made it. Doc nodded slowly. Like this confirmed something he'd already worked out. Then he set hands on his knees and said, in the careful way he had of introducing difficult information, there's a woman, Nora Calloway. Widow. Her husband passed 8 months ago. Her place is out east of the Talbot Road, or was. She's been boarding in town since January, trying to sort out the ranch situation. He paused. She reported 3 missing calves about 2 weeks before that blizzard. Said her herd got scattered in a night storm, lost several head. These 3 were the ones she couldn't find. Ellie was very still. She's been asking around, Doc continued, quietly. But she's been asking. The bullet wound, he hadn't forgotten it. He'd been thinking about it, in fact. In the margins of the days, between feedings in the hour of night when Pip finally stayed asleep and the hour when it got light. A cow didn't get shot in a spring blizzard by accident. That wasn't something that happened by accident. Someone had put a bullet into that animal deliberately and left her in the snow to die slowly enough that the calves would be born before she was gone. Someone had done that on purpose. What do you know about her? Eli asked. Luck looked at him a moment, measuring the way he sometimes did before he said the thing he'd actually called you in to say. Husband died 8 months ago. Horse threw him. Old gate latch gave way. She's been dealing with the ranch situation alone since then. The bank is involved, he paused. It's been a hard year for her, Eli. Hard in a way you probably understand better than most people around here. Another pause. Those calves. If they're hers, she's got a Clem, I know that. And if you've had them 5 weeks. I know what 5 weeks is. Doc was quiet. Outside, the two women on the corner had gone their separate ways. A dog trotted past the window, nose down, following something interesting in the snow. The ordinary world, conducting its ordinary business. I'll need the supplies, Eli said finally. Real milk replacer, not the emergency powder. Electrolytes calibrated for calves specifically. Some starter grain for when they're ready to transition. He stood up. Can you put me together a list of where to get what? Doc had a notepad out before Eli finished the sentence. Already half written. One more thing, Doc said as Eli reached the door. Eli paused. She's going to find out. If you're coming into town for supplies, someone's going to say something. That's how small towns work. Doc set the notepad on the counter for Eli to take. Better to know that's coming than to be surprised by it. Ellie took the notepad. Thanks, Doc. He went to get the supplies. May became June, June became July, and Eli Brannock, who had not made a friend in 6 years and had not particularly wanted one, became without entirely meaning to, without a single deliberate decision he could point to. A man with 3 calves who followed him everywhere. Everywhere was the word. Not sometimes, not when it suited them. Everywhere. He would walk out to the barn in the morning, and all 3 would be at the pen gate before he was halfway across the yard, arranged in a loose hierarchy that had established itself in the first weeks and never changed. Roan slightly ahead, Shade just behind Eli's left shoulder, Pip wherever was most inconvenient, under his feet, between his legs, with her nose pressed into the back of his knee, at exactly the moment when moving fast would have been useful. He fell down twice in June because of Pip. Both times he lay there in the grass for a second looking at the sky, and Pip would come around and look down at him with those wide eyes. Not concerned exactly, more like she was waiting to see what he was going to do about this. And he would absolutely not laugh. He would absolutely not laugh. He might have laughed once. There was nobody to see it either way. He expanded the pen into a proper small paddock off the side of the barn. Cut the fence posts himself, which his shoulder had opinions about. He did it anyway. Got proper milk replacer in addition to the dried powder. Got hay when they were ready to start mouthing at it, which was earlier than the books said, because, in particular, had decided he was ready for solid food approximately 3 weeks before any reasonable timeline would have suggested. Eli had to hand separate Roan's milk ration from the hay twice a day, which involved a level of patient negotiation that left him consistently feeling like he'd lost an argument to a calf. He was, by any objective measure, losing this. Whatever he'd thought this was going to be, a temporary situation, a few weeks, figure something out, it was not that anymore. He knew it. He didn't examine it too closely, the way you didn't look directly at certain things because looking directly at them made them real, and then you had to decide what to do about them being real. He went to Coldwater more often now. Had to, for supplies. That was true. But he noticed that he started going even when he didn't strictly need to. Tuesday when there was no grain to pick up. Thursday, just to stop into Doc Fenn's for 10 minutes and exchanged 5 sentences about nothing important. He started recognizing people's faces again. Started nodding when he passed people on the street, instead of looking through them. Clarara at the feed store always asked about the calves. He always said they were fine. She always looked pleased. He found that he did not mind this. He found that he looked forward to it slightly, which alarmed him slightly. He had a system. The system had worked for 6 years. The system involved a minimum of human contact, a maximum of useful physical labor, and absolutely no situations in which he might feel something that could be taken away from him again. It was a working system. It required maintenance, but it held. 3 calves complicated the system considerably. One evening, in late July, he was sitting on the porch after dinner. Something he'd started doing again. Sitting on the porch in the evenings, which he hadn't done in years because it used to be something Vera liked, something they did together with coffee, and the sound of the creek below, and the light going complicated across the mountains, and all three calves were in the paddock below, visible from where he sat. Shade was lying down with his head up, watching the Yauri line. Roan was doing whatever it was Roan did in the evenings, which seemed to involve a systematic assessment of all structural elements of the fence, looking for weakness. And Pip was standing at the paddock gate, looking straight at him, just looking the way she'd been looking at him since the beginning. That direct, uncomplicated attention. Like she'd decided something about him on day one and was just simply waiting for him to catch up to what she already knew. He looked back. The light was doing something complicated with the mountains behind her. That summer evening quality, gold going amber going rose, the peaks holding it longer than the valley did. He thought about Vera. About how she used to say he had the emotional range of a fence post when he was avoiding something. She'd said it fondly. She said most true things about him fondly, which was either her greatest gift or the thing he missed most about her, and he'd stopped being able to tell those apart a long time ago. He thought about Danny. Hey, Dad, look. A Pip. He got up and went inside before it got any worse. August. Roan stopped being a calf and started being a young bull in training, which meant he started being difficult in a whole new register. He figured out how to unlatch the paddock gate with his nose. This took 4 days of focused effort on his part, which Eli observed with a mixture of reluctant admiration and professional concern. Twice in the first week, Eli came out in the morning to find all three of them standing in the yard, as if they'd simply decided that arrangement made more sense. This is not where you live, Eli told Roan. Roan looked at the porch steps. Clearly calculating no, he put a second latch on the gate. Roan figured that one out in 6 days. He put on a third. They reached a kind of détente after that, an unspoken arrangement. Roan would not attempt the third latch if Eli would take them out on the lead line twice a day for a proper walk, not just the paddock. This was not a conversation they had. It was simply the agreement that existed, arrived at through some negotiation process. Eli could not entirely account for. He was walking cattle. Eli Brannock, former wilderness scout, was walking cattle up a mountain trail twice a day. If he thought about it too hard, it seemed ridiculous. So he didn't think about it. He just walked, and they followed, and the mountain went on being beautiful in August the way it always was. Every wildflower going at once, the creek running full and clear, the sky that particular altitude blue that you couldn't reproduce anywhere lower. Shade fell into the habit of walking beside him rather than behind him, 2 feet off Eli's left shoulder, matching his pace. He'd read somewhere, some wildlife study, years back, he couldn't remember where, that animals chose their position in movement, relative to the individual they were paired with based on the nature of the relationship. Behind meant safety and deference. Beside meant partnership and equivalence. He didn't know if that was true for cattle specifically. He walked beside Shade anyway. One Thursday in the 3rd week of August, he came down to Coldwater, and Cleric at the feed store asked how the calves were doing, and before he could stop himself, he said, Roan figured out 2 latches. Had to put on a third, Clara laughed. A real one, and Eli found himself talking. Actually talking. Not just exchanging necessary information, for about 8 minutes. About the latch situation. About Roan's systematic approach to the fence. About the time Pip had gotten her ear stuck in the water bucket and stood there completely still, not struggling, just waiting with absolute patience for him to come fix it. Like she'd known he would come. Like there was no scenario in which he wouldn't. He drove home thinking. That was 8 minutes. He hadn't talked for 8 unbroken minutes to another person in. He didn't want to calculate it. He didn't calculate it. He had enough things he wasn't examining. September arrived, and the aspens started turning that particular gold. High-altitude autumn gold that didn't look like any other gold in the world. You couldn't explain it to someone who hadn't seen it. The specific quality of the light threw those leaves on. A clear September morning. You just had to be there. Eli was there. He'd been there every September for 6 years, and it had been, each time, the thing that almost broke him open, because Vera had loved it so much, had planned her whole year around it, had stood on the porch every morning in October, cataloging the changes day by day. This tree first, she'd say, then that ridge, then watch. One morning you'll wake up and the whole slope will go at once. He was on the porch, on a clear afternoon in late September when Roan stopped moving. That was what caught his attention first. Roan didn't stop moving. Roan operated at a continuous low-grade energy, always doing something, but he'd stopped. Head up, ears forward. Looking at the trail that came up from the south, Ely heard the hoofbeats a moment later. He didn't get up yet. Visitors were not common, but they weren't impossible. Sometimes hikers who'd taken a wrong turn. Sometimes the Hadley boy with something from town, once a very lost out-of-state hunter, who'd needed directions and had them memorized before he was 3 sentences in. Single horse, tired pace, unhurried, not emergency, not threat. The horse came around the bend in the trail. The rider was a woman, young or youngish. It was hard to tell from the porch. She was slight on the horse, and the horse was older, a bay quarter horse moving slow but sound. She was dressed for work, worn boots, heavy canvas jacket that had seen real use. Hair pulled back in a practical knot that wasn't interested in being decorative. She came up to the fence line and stopped. Looked at the paddock. Ely watched her look at the paddock. He saw the moment she found them. The way her body changed, not a big movement, not dramatic. Just a small stillness, and then something that was not quite a breath, and not quite a sound. She was looking at Pip, at the white mark on Pip's forehead. He didn't stand up yet. She hadn't seen him on the porch. Or maybe she had, and was giving herself a moment. Working through something before she had to speak. Then she looked up, found him. She had the reddest eyes he'd ever seen on a person who wasn't currently crying. Like she'd been crying for a very long time and had stopped recently, and not by choice. Like at some point she'd simply run out, and the redness was what remained. But her chin was steady. Her hands on the reins were steady. She got down off the horse, tied it to the fence post, with a quick, neat knot. The kind of knot that went in without looking, pure muscle memory. Walked to the paddock gate and stopped there, her hands on the top rail. Looking at Pip, Pip came over. Of course, Pip came over. Ellie watched Pip walk straight to this stranger and put her nose against the woman's hand, and he watched the woman's hand close gently around Pip's nose, without her seeming to decide to do it, like her body knew before the decision was made. He stood up, she heard him, turned around. They looked at each other across the yard. For a moment, him on the porch, her at the fence, Pip's nose in her hand. Roan watching with the alert suspicion he normally reserved for coyotes. Shade having gotten up from his lying spot to stand at the fence and observe. "Those calves are mine," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud. Factual, the way you'd state something that simply was. Ellie looked at her. Looked at Pip, still in her hand. He said nothing. He turned and walked back into the cabin. The door closed behind him, not a slam. Just the quiet, definite click of a door, doing what doors did. He stood in the dim interior, heard her on the other side, not knocking, not yet, just standing there. And all 3 calves at the fence, he knew without looking, facing the cabin. He pressed his hand flat against the door, once, just once. Just for a second, and then went to put the kettle on, because something was going to have to happen next. It was just going to take him a minute to figure out what. She didn't knock. That was the first thing Ely noticed, standing in the cabin with the kettle on and his hands on the counter. He'd been waiting for the knock. Braced for it, the way you braced for something you knew was coming, but didn't know the exact shape of yet. It didn't come. Just wind. Just the small sounds of 3 calves in the paddock. Just the ordinary quiet of a September afternoon on a mountain that didn't care what was happening in the yard below. He waited 5 minutes. Then he went to the window. She was still there, standing at the paddock fence with her back to him. Both hands on the top rail, not moving. Just standing there with Pip's head pressed against her arm, and the aspens going gold behind her, and her old bay horse tied patient at the post. Her shoulders were very still in that particular way. That meant she was holding something down by force of will, and had been doing so for long enough that it looked like stillness but wasn't. He knew that way of holding. He'd stood like that for approximately 6. He went back to the kettle, made 2 cups, stood there looking at them like they'd appeared without his involvement, which, in the meaningful sense, they basically had. He picked up both cups and went to the door. She heard it open. Gave herself one breath. He saw that, the slight expansion of her shoulders, and then she turned. He held out the second cup. She looked at it. Then at him. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I know, a beat." "That's not an invitation," he said. "I didn't take it as one." She took the cup. They stood on opposite sides of the paddock fence and drank in silence. Pip stayed pressed against her arm, eyes half closed with something that looked like relief. Roan had moved to the far end of the paddock and was standing with his back to both of them. His way, Eli had learned, of expressing displeasure without committing to a position. Shade watched. Shade always watched. The white mark on her forehead, the woman said finally. Her mother had the same one. Exactly the same placement. Eli didn't answer. The scar on the big one's left foreleg. He got it the night he was born. There was ice on the barn floor. My husband kept apologizing to him for 3 days afterward, like the calf knew. Like it mattered, something moved in Eli's chest. He didn't want it to. "I'm Nora Calloway." She said, "I know who you are." She looked at him then. A quick recalibrating look. "Doc Fenn." She said, "Doc Fenn." She nodded, processing. Then, "So you've known? I've known someone was looking and?" He looked at the paddock, at Pip, still pressed against her arm, at Roan's stubborn back, at Shade watching them both with that measuring quality. "And I kept them alive," he said. "That's what I know." Her jaw tightened. One small movement. "Controlled. I'll be back tomorrow," she said. She set the cup on the fence post, untied her horse with those quick, practiced hands, got up into the saddle without looking at him, rode down the trail without looking back. Eli stood there until the sound of hoofbeats was gone into the trees. Then he looked at Pip. Pip looked at him. "Don't," he said. Pip blinked. He picked up both empty cups and went inside. She came back the next day. And the day after that, every morning around 10, hoofbeats on the trail. Every morning Eli would be somewhere, fixing fence, splitting wood, doing something with his hands. And he'd hear it, and his jaw would tighten, and he'd keep doing whatever he was doing. She didn't ask to come into the paddock. That was a careful thing to do. He noticed it, though he told himself he didn't. She stood at the fence. She talked to them through the rails, quietly, in the way you talked to animals, not performing it, just doing it. She brought nothing, took nothing. Made no demands that first week beyond the fact of her presence. Pip came to her every time. Every single time, without hesitation, like she recognized something she'd been looking for. Which Eli found. Annoying was too small a word. Infuriating was too large. Somewhere in between. A medium-sized injustice he had no legitimate complaint about and knew it. Roan came around by day 4. Not dramatically, more like he happened to drift in her direction and happened to let hers. Scratch behind his ears and happened to stand there for minutes with innocent eyes half closed while she did it. Happened to. Shade took the full week. Watched her from across the paddock every day and on the 7th morning walked over and stood near her. No ceremony. Just a decision made and enacted. The first real fight happened on day 8. He'd known it was coming. There was a kind of pressure that built between two people who were both being careful, both waiting for the other to say the first real thing. She said it first. "I need to know what your plan is." He was splitting wood. "Didn't stop. My plan for them, long term. You're one person on a mountain. They need land. I know what they need, do you?" He set the axe down. Turned around, 12 feet between them. Close enough to read faces. Far enough to feel the distance. "I've kept them alive for 5 months," he said. "Fed them through the night for the first 2 weeks. Sat on the floor of my cabin to make sure the smallest one didn't stop breathing. Don't tell me what they need. They need to come home." The word landed, home. He picked the axe back up. "This is their home," he said. "Eli, Mrs. Calloway, formal. a wall going up clear as anything. I think we're done for today, a long silence. I'm not done, she said. I know you're not. He kept splitting wood. She stayed for a while longer. Then she left. He went into Coldwater on a Tuesday. Supplies. Nothing that couldn't have waited. And Doc Fenn was standing in front of his office in that way he sometimes had, like he'd known you were coming and wanted to catch you before you got too far. Nora Calloway's been in, Doc said. I figured. She asked about you. Ellie stopped. What kind of asked? Doc tilted his head. The kind where someone's trying to understand a person without quite admitting they're doing it. She asked how long you'd lived up there. I said 6 years. She asked why. I said that was your story to tell. He looked at Eli steadily. Then she asked if you were the kind of man who did the right thing. What did you say? I said you were the kind of man who did the hard thing, which isn't always the same, but usually overlaps enough to matter. A pause. She doesn't have the money for a lawyer, Doc said quietly. The ranch situation. The bank is patient, but not indefinitely patient. Those 3 calves are the best breeding stock she had left. Their mother was a registered Highland cross. Good cold-weather genetics. The kind of bloodline that took years to develop and was worth considerably more than just the animal itself. If she can get them to maturity, she has something to rebuild with. He paused. I'm telling you because I think you should know. Why didn't she tell me herself? Doc gave him a look that said several things without using words. Right, Eli said. He drove home thinking about registered bloodlines, about Highland cross genetics, about a bullet wound in a dead cow's side on a spring mountain that nobody was supposed to be on in that blizzard. He stopped the truck halfway up the mountain road, sat for a minute. If someone had deliberately scattered Nora Calloway's herd in a night storm, if someone had shot the cow, if someone had specifically wanted those calves, a valuable bloodline, the kind of thing you'd know about if you followed county livestock records. Then, Nora hadn't just had a bad season. Someone had engineered her bad season. He drove home. That evening, he pulled up the county property records he had downloaded to his laptop years back for reasons he couldn't now recall. He found the Calloway parcel easily enough, east of Talbot Road. 140 acres, not large, but the satellite view showed good pasture. Well-watered, a reliable spring on the northwest edge. Adjacent to the east was a much larger tract, almost 800 acres. Registered to a company name, he wrote it down, went to bed, did not sleep. The next morning, Nora showed up at the usual time. He was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She looked at that like it might be a trap. Sit down, he said. I need to tell you something. She sat. Didn't touch the coffee yet. Someone shot your cow, he said. She was very still. I know that, she said. He looked at her. I've known since February, she said. When I found one of the other cows, she'd been cut out from the fence line from outside. Someone cut the wire. Her hands were flat on her knees. Controlled. I reported it to Sheriff Dent, and he wrote it down. A beat. There's not much a 65-year-old county sheriff can do against a man with 800 acres and 4 lawyers on retainer. Easley sat back. You know who it is, he said. I have a strong idea. Why didn't you? Because knowing isn't proving, she said, and because I have no money and no lawyer, and 1 good horse and I pick my battles carefully. She looked at him directly. Right now my battle is getting my calves back, the mountain air between them. The aspens moving in a light breeze off the ridge. If I help you, Eli said. With the other thing. The proof. She looked at him carefully. Why would you do that? He didn't have a clean answer. The honest ones were. Because I've been angry about that bullet wound since April, and I'm the kind of man who does something about that. Because I don't like men who use 800 acres as leverage. Because Roan figured out 3 latches, and Shade walks beside me and Pip trusts me. And it turns out I have strong opinions about what happens to them, he said, because it's the right thing, which covered most of it. She was quiet for a moment. I don't need saving, she said. I know, I'm not asking for help. I know that too. A pause. But I'm not turning it down either, she said. She picked up the coffee. October arrived sideways, the way it did in the high country. One day warm and gold and still. The next day, something with an edge in it. Winter knocking at the door to see who answered. Nora started staying later. Not by design. It would just be 3 o'clock and then 4. And they'd be going over the Callaway property records, comparing notes, figuring out what could be documented, and how. And then the light would be going, and one of them would mention food, and somehow there would be food. The first time it happened, they both pretended it wasn't. The second time, they acknowledged it minimally. By the third time, Eli just put on a second pot of soup without asking. She helped with the calves during this period. That wasn't discussed either. It simply evolved. She was there. The calves needed their evening routine. She knew what she was doing, and he knew what he was doing. And two people doing a task efficiently together was just efficiency. That was what it was. Efficiency. He watched her with them sometimes when she didn't know he was watching, the way she moved around them. Not tentative. Not performing confidence. Just actually confident. Like she'd done this her whole life, which she had. She had the hands of someone who worked. Capable hands. Chapped at the knuckles. She never wore gloves if she could avoid it. Thomas had taught her that, she mentioned once. Not in explanation. They'd been talking about something else and it just came loose. Thomas said you couldn't feel what you were doing through gloves. Eli had not said anything. But he'd thought, that sounds like someone I would have liked. The argument about the offer happened on an evening in mid-October. He'd heard about it from Clara at the feed store, a man named Garrett Voss, who owned the adjacent 800 acres, had made an offer for the calves 3 weeks before the blizzard. She'd turned it down. Thomas had turned it down before her. Ellie brought it up at the kitchen table. Notes spread out, lamp on, fire going. Voss offered to buy them, Eli said. Before the storm. Clara mentioned it. Clara mentions a lot of things. She wasn't wrong, though. No, Nora said, you turned him down. Thomas turned him down first. Then Thomas died. Voss made the offer again. She was very calm about it. The kind of calm that was a choice. I turned it down. The money would have helped. It would have helped a lot. She looked at the table. I said no, why? She was quiet a moment. Because Thomas said no, she said. And Thomas knew something about Molly's bloodline that he didn't share with anyone but me. What he said was, these calves are going to be something. Worth everything we put into them. And some things you hold on to because someone you loved believed in them. A pause. Even when it's harder to hold on than to let go. The fire popped. Outside, October pressed against the windows. Eli sat with that for a while. Then he said, Vera used to say I'd argue with a fence post. Nora blinked. The shift was abrupt enough to throw her off balance, which was why he'd done it. She wasn't wrong, he said. A small pause. Vera was your wife. Yes, how long? 12 years. She didn't ask the next question. She just waited, which was exactly the right thing to do, and he noticed that. She died 6 years ago, he said. Danny, too. He was 4. He looked at the table, at his hands. Fever. Fast. I was down the mountain when it got bad. Tried to get back in time. He stopped. He'd never said that much to anyone. Not even Doc Finn. Nora didn't say anything. Didn't move. Just sat there with him in it, the way you could sit in a room with someone, without needing to change anything about the room. Thomas fell from his horse, she said, quietly. After a moment, old gate latch gave way. The horse spooked and Thomas, she shook her head once. There was nothing to be done. Nothing anyone could have done differently. A pause. I still go over it, I know. Every sequence. Every if, I know, he said. Again, they sat. The fire was the only sound for a while. Then Nora said quietly, I thought if I got the calves back, I'd feel like something was fixed, does it? A long pause. I don't know yet, she said. I'm not back yet. Ellie nodded. He understood that. He was not entirely back yet either. The trouble came in the second week of October. He'd been half expecting something. Lawyers, paperwork, something in an envelope from a county office. Not 2 men on horses at dusk, with their faces turned away from the camera he'd installed on the barn eave, in August, for reasons he'd told himself were practical, general. He saw them from the window, coming up the south trail, moving quiet. Moving wrong, not the way people moved when they were coming to knock on a door. He got his boots, got his coat. Got the thing he kept on the high shelf and hoped not to use. He went out the back. Came around the side of the barn in the dark. The two men were at the paddock fence, one with wire cutters, the other talking low to the calves, which was almost funny. The idea of someone murmuring reassurances to cattle they were about to steal. Roan was backed to the far end of the paddock, head low, ears flat, with the particular body language of an animal who had recently updated his self-assessment and was prepared to act on it, shade pressed against the far fence. Still, watching Pip was nowhere. That was wrong. Pip was always. He heard her behind him. She'd gotten out through a gap in the rails. 5 feet back, ears forward, blowing softly in the cold. Go back, he said quietly. She didn't go back. Of course she didn't. Put the cutters down, he said, coming around the barn corner. Both men turned. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not graceful. Cold and dark, a gatepost, someone's shoulder connecting hard with Eli's ribs. Eli, going to one knee and coming back up. Roan hitting the fence from the inside, with a sound like a small explosion. Ultimately, two men on horses deciding that this particular mountain, on this particular evening, was not going to give them what they'd come for. They left fast. Ellie stood in the yard. His ribs were, yep. That was going to be a week of careful breathing. He pressed his hand against his side. Turned. Nora was at the edge of the yard. She'd come up the trail while it was happening, her horse tied at the post, a flashlight in her hand. Looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, alarmed and furious, and something else he wasn't ready to name. I heard horses, she said. Yeah, are you? She looked at the way he was holding his side. Come inside, I'm fine, Eli. He looked at her. He went inside. The first aid kit was under the sink. She found it before he told her. Pressed along his ribs with systematic, capable hands, checking for the specific catch in the breathing that meant broken rather than just badly bruised. He caught his breath twice. Bruised, she said. Probably. If it gets worse, you need an X-ray. It won't get worse, because you said so, because I know what broken ribs feel like. A pause, have you had them before? Once, what from? Horse, of course, she said. And there was something in her voice that was almost, a laugh. She wrapped the ribs efficiently, without fuss. He sat very still and let her. When she was done, she went to the stove and put water on, moving around his kitchen with a familiarity that should have felt strange and didn't. Had stopped feeling strange somewhere around the third shared meal. Those were Voss's men, she said. Probably, which means he knows they're here. He's always known. He was waiting to see how things went between you and me before he moved. She turned around. And how are things going, she said. Between you and me. Eli looked at the table, complicated question. She had a legal claim. He had 5 months of raising them from newborns. Sheriff Dent had told him recently that she could file civil action and it would go to mediation. Months, money neither of them had. He didn't want to think about that level of it. We have bigger things to figure out first, he said. She sat down across from him. The lamp was low. The stars were coming out over the mountain. He shot Molly, she said. Quiet. Certain, yes, Eli said. Thomas knew it would happen eventually. Someone with that kind of money looking at that bloodline, and a small operation next door that couldn't defend itself. She looked at her hands. He thought we had more time. I have photographs, Eli said. Of the carcass, the wound, the angle and direction of the shot. I kept the coordinates. It's not a case yet, but it's enough to make a man who moves carefully very uncomfortable. She looked at him. You photographed it. Old habit. Scout training. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something earlier than a smile. Thomas would have liked you, she said. He didn't know what to do with that, so he didn't do anything. Get some sleep, he said. Trail's dark. You can take the spare room. Are you offering or telling? Offering, he said. With some force. This time it was definitely almost a smile. All right, she said. Sheriff Dent came up the mountain on a gray October morning, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd been doing his job long enough that the land itself seemed to make room for him. He stood in Eli's yard and looked at the paddock and at the marks on the fence post, from the night of the wire cutters and at the cabin. Heard you had some trouble, he said. Word travels. It does. He pulled his coat around him. Nora Calloway filed a civil claim yesterday. Mediator from Denver, probably January. Way the docket is. He looked at Eli steadily. You've got time. But that's what's coming. Ellie nodded. And Garrett Voss has made some calls, Dent said, in the careful way he had of saying things that cost him something. He's got a claim filed too. Says he had a verbal agreement with Thomas Calloway that predated the death. Thomas didn't make verbal agreements, Nora said. She'd come around from the barn. Dent looked at her without surprise. I know that, he said. And you know that. But I need more than our knowledge. If there's anything in writing, any witness, any correspondence where Thomas refused the offer. I have letters, Nora said. Thomas wrote to his brother in Oregon when Voss first made the approach. Explained the whole situation. Said no 4 different ways. Dent's expression shifted. Just slightly. Get me those letters, he said. The letters took 3 days to arrive from Oregon. Thomas's brother sent them overnight the moment Nora called. 8 pages in Thomas Calloway's handwriting. A man Eli had never met and would never meet. A man who was gone. But on those pages, a voice. Clear and specific and, in the way it spoke about the calves and Molly, and the land and what he and Nora were building toward, something that made Eli put them down after the 3rd page and go outside for a while. Because the way Thomas wrote about his wife, Nora knows this land like she knows me. From the inside out, we're going to be all right. We just need to hold on through this part. Ellie stood in the late October cold. Shade came and stood beside him. He reached down and put his hand on Shade's neck. Felt the warmth. The slow, steady breathing through this part. He thought about Vera. About how she used to say, this part won't last forever. Whenever anything was hard, whenever he was being impossible about something, she'd put her hand on his back and say it like a fact. This part won't last forever. He'd believed her every time. And then the part that lasted forever came. But maybe he thought this slowly, like ice thawing, like something releasing. Maybe she hadn't meant only the hard parts. Maybe she meant all of it. The good parts also didn't last forever, which meant you had to be inside them, fully. While they were there, he hadn't been doing that. He'd been standing on the porch of his life, looking in through the window. Shade bumped his hand with a cold nose. Yeah, Eli said. I know. The civil claim notice arrived by courier that Thursday. Official paper, county seal. January 14th. He put it on the table and went out to the paddock. Roan was lying down, unusual for Roan, who ran at a continuous low-grade canter through life. He was lying in the thin October sun with his eyes half closed, growing fast. He wasn't the calf Eli had carried home in April anymore. He was something becoming itself. And doing it with conviction, Eli leaned on the fence, thought about January. About a mediator from Denver who would apply principles and make determinations and would not know what it was like to be on the floor of a cabin at 3 a.m, getting a newborn calf to take a bottle by putting warm milk on your fingers first. Would not know what it meant that Shade walked beside him, that Pip had trusted him from the first night. Would not know what this had become. Nora came up that afternoon, handed her the notice. She read it. January, she said. Yeah. She handed it back. They stood at the fence looking at the calves. Eli, she said. He waited. I don't want to take them from you. He kept his eyes on the paddock. They came to you, she said. They chose you. I understand what that means. Her voice was steady. That particular steady, he now knew, was not the absence of feeling but the management of it. I also need them, not to sell. Because Thomas put everything into that bloodline, and he's not here to see it through, and I am. A pause. Both things are true. I know, he said. So what do we do? He turned and looked at her. The afternoon light was flat, gray clouds moving in from the northwest. She was looking back at him with those reddened eyes that weren't red from crying right now. Just from months of being a person who'd had a genuinely hard year and kept going anyway. He recognized that. He'd looked like that for 6 years. I don't know yet, he said. But I know a mediator from Denver isn't going to get it right. She nodded. So we figure it out ourselves, she said. We figure it out ourselves. A first rumble, far off. You should stay, he said. Weather's coming, yeah, she said, it is. She tied her horse under the barn overhang, and the storm came down, and the two of them went inside. And in the paddock, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Roan stood up from where he'd been lying. Shade moved to the fence line. Pip put her nose into the wind, all three of them facing the cabin, the light in the window, the sound of two people inside being alive. That was enough for now. That was exactly enough. 3 weeks passed. The kind of 3 weeks that didn't announce themselves, just work and cold, and the particular silence of two people who had said what needed saying and were waiting to see what came next. Then the storm came in hard that night, not the polite kind. This one came off the northwest ridge like it had somewhere to be. Wind first. Then snow so thick and fast it turned the yard into nothing. Just white. Just moving white. Just the sound of the world rearranging itself. He'd checked the paddock 3 times before dark. Extra hay. Water trough heater running. Gate triple latched. Because Roan. Fence line solid. All 3 calves inside the small barn shelter he had built off the paddock in August. Roan standing. Shade lying. Pip pressed between them. Good. He'd gone back inside. And now it was midnight and there was a sound underneath the wind. Not the stovepipe moan or the window rattle or the percussion of snow coming sideways off the eave. Something lower. Something that moved. He was awake before he knew he was awake. Sitting up. Listening. There Aegon Roan's voice. And he knew Roan's voice now the way you knew anyone's voice. The full register of it. The difference between annoyance and actual fear. This was the second, the one he'd only heard twice before, both times meaning genuine threat. He was out of bed. Boots. Coat. The thing from the high shelf. He hit the door running. The cold was physical. An object you walked into, he moved by memory. 20 steps to the fence, left at the post, gate wolves. 2 no, 3 at the fence line. Big winter animals, thin from a hard season in the valley. He didn't begrudge them. But not tonight. Not here. Roan was at the inside of the fence, head low, the sound continuous. Not panic. Something more deliberate. He was telling them, the wolves, Eli, everyone, this is my ground. Shade behind Roan, Pip behind Shade, the 3 of them in a line in the dark and the snow. Holding, Eli got to the fence. One wolf turned toward him. Yellow eyes in the flashlight, big animal. Not afraid, hey, Eli said. Sharp, he moved to the gate, made himself large. Took up space the way 4 years of wilderness work had taught him. How to be something not worth the cost of confronting. It took a while. 2 wolves peeled off into the dark. The third held longer. So did Eli. The wolf went. He stood there a moment, letting his heartbeat settle. Then Roan hit the gate from inside. Not in fear. Roan never acted in fear. But with opinion and emphasis like, you took long enough, I know. Eli said. He got the gate open. Roan moved into the space immediately, shoulder against Eli's arm, that solid warmth. Like, you're here, I'm here, Eli said. He stood in the paddock in the blizzard with his hand on Roan's neck, just standing, just breathing. Shade was fine, watching the fence line with those careful eyes. Pip was at his elbow. She'd gotten around him somehow, pressed against his left side with her head, tucked toward his chest, the way she did when she wanted to be small. Which she was not. She was 6 months old and not small. She didn't seem to know that. You're all right, he told her. He stood there with his arm across Pip's back, and his hand on Roan's neck, and Shade at his peripheral edge, and the blizzard being entirely unreasonable all around them. Then his left foot went out from under him. Ice under the snow. He went down sideways and his left shoulder, the bad one, the one Doc Fenn had been after him about for a year, hit the frozen ground at the worst possible angle, the sound it made. He lay there a moment, snow on his face. Dark above him, okay. That was not good. He tried to push up with both arms. The left arm responded in a specific sharp language that meant, not right now. He rolled to his right. Got to his knees. Got 1 foot under him. Roan's head appeared above him. The expression on Roan's face was somewhere between concerned and personally offended. I'm fine, Eli said. Roan snorted directly onto his hat. Thank you, he got up. Got the gate latched, all 3 latches. Checked the fence line as best he could in the dark. Made it back to the cabin. Got inside. Got his coat off. And then there was Nora, standing in the hallway in the flannel shirt she'd borrowed for sleeping, hair down, fully and immediately awake. She looked at his shoulder. "Sit down," she said. "I'm Eli." He sat down. She was efficient about it. He was grateful for that. He was not feeling dignified, and efficiency meant she wasn't going to spend time on his dignity, just on the problem. She got his shirt off, pressed along the shoulder with those capable hands, asking where it hurt without using many words. He told her. "Without many words, you need an X-ray," she said. "Tomorrow, Eli, the storm won't stop for another 6 hours. Tomorrow," she held her position. Then let it go. She wrapped the shoulder, found the anti-inflammatory in the kit, and got him to take it without making it a thing. Then went to the stove, put water on, moved around his kitchen in the dark and wind, with the easy familiarity she'd developed over weeks of being here, finding things without asking, not taking over, just present. He sat at the table and watched her. His shoulder ached in a deep, specific way. He was thinking about the wolves. No. He was thinking about the way Roan had stood at that fence in the dark, holding his ground, not running, not making himself smaller. "This is my place. You cannot have it." Eli had spent 6 years making himself small, not visibly. From the outside, he probably looked like just a man who chose solitude, but internally, pulling back from things, keeping the perimeter tight, not letting anything in that could hurt on the way out. 3 calves had gotten through the perimeter without him noticing. And then Nora Calloway had stood at his fence and said, "Those are mine." And he'd closed the door, and she'd come back anyway, every day. He was thinking about this in the way that happened when you were in pain at 3 in the morning. And the world outside was wind, and the world inside was warm, and there was a person at your stove who had learned where you kept everything. He was thinking about what Vera would say. She would say, "Took you long enough." She would say it fondly. Nora set a cup in front of him, sat across the table, didn't talk, which was one of the things he'd learned about her. She didn't fill silence just because it was there. The storm went on outside. The fire went on inside. "I'm not good at this," he said. She waited. People. Letting things. He stopped. "I've been alone a long time, I know," she said. "It's not that I don't." He stopped again. This was why he didn't talk. The sentences came out bent. "Eli," she said. He looked at her. "I know," she said again. "Quieter the fire, the wind. 2 people at a table at 3 in the morning. Get some sleep," she said. "We'll figure the rest out in the morning." He looked at her for a moment. "All of it?" he said, and she said, "All of it." Morning came gray and still. The storm had exhausted itself and left behind the particular quiet that followed serious weather. Everything white. Everything softened. The mountain holding all that snow like it was something it had been trusted with. Eli woke with his shoulder, telling him exactly what it thought about the previous night. He lay still for a moment. Cataloging. Shooter. Bad but functional. Ribs from October. Still present but lower on the list. 3 calves. Needed checking. Nora. He needed to. He got up. The fire was going. She'd kept it through the night. He looked out the window. She was in the paddock with all 3 of them. She'd brought the morning hay. Roan was eating. Shade was standing close. And Pip was doing the thing she did with Nora now, the same thing she'd done with Eli from the first week. Head pressed, eyes closed, just being held. He stood at the window. He let himself look at it, not checking on them, not monitoring anything, just looking. At Nora in the morning snow with his calves. At the way she moved around them. At the way they moved around her. At the way this looked like something real. He went and put the coffee on. She came in stamping snow off her boots, saw the coffee. Sat down. He sat across from her. They both drank. "Tell me what you want," he said. She set her cup down. Not surprised by the directness. She'd gotten used to him, the way he did things without preamble once he'd decided. "What I want," she said. Yes, she actually thought about it. He could see her thinking, the genuine weighing of it, not performing the question. "I want the ranch to work," she said. "Thomas's ranch, my ranch. I want to make it what he believed it could be." A pause. "I want to stop being afraid of whether it's possible." Another pause, smaller. "And I want—" She stopped. He waited. She looked at the window. At the White Yard. I've been so lonely, she said, Sybil. Factual, like she'd been carrying that sentence for a long time and had finally just set it down. Yeah, he said. Is that something you understand? Yes, he said. Without hesitation. The word went between them like something that had been decided. She nodded. He looked at his coffee. Then at her. Roan and Shade should go with you, he said. She went very still. They're what you need to rebuild. That bloodline. What Thomas believed in, you need them on your land. Not on mine, he paused. Pip stays. She opened her mouth. Pip chose me first night, he said. She'd been choosing me since before she had her eyes open all the way. I'm not. I can't. He stopped. Reorganized. She's mine. The way something is yours when you've been responsible for it in the dark, when nobody was watching. Nora was quiet. Something moved in her expression. Some calculation he couldn't fully read. You're not asking me, she said. No, you're telling me. I'm telling you what I think is right. And if I disagree, then we disagree. But I think you know I'm right. A long pause. Roan's going to be impossible to trailer, she said. Which was not a disagreement. Which was, I know, he said. And something in his chest went loose. Just a fraction. I'll help you, she looked at her hands. Those capable, chapped hands. I'm not going to pretend this is easy, she said. It's not easy. I've been fighting for them for 6 months, I know. And you're asking me to. I'm not asking you to give up, he said. I'm asking you to choose what you're actually fighting for, he paused. There's a difference, she sat with that. A long time, the fire went on. The snow outside went on. Pip made her sound from the paddock, that particular morning sound she had. And both of them heard it and neither of them said anything about it. Okay, Nora said. Just that. Okay, he said. Sheriff Dent came up, 2 days later, with news he delivered the way he delivered everything. Standing in the yard, unhurried, like the information would wait, Garrett Voss had been served. The letters from Thomas's brother. 8 pages of clear refusal in Thomas's own handwriting, combined with Eli's photographs of the carcass, and the county land records had been enough to open a formal investigation. Not criminal yet, but formal. His lawyers are making noise, Dent said. Noise isn't the same as winning, he looked at Eli. Good work on the documentation. Old habit. Dent looked between them. At the paddock. At the 2 coffee cups on the porch rail. He was 65 years old, and had the grace to leave unspoken everything he knew. I'll be in touch, he said. He got on his horse and rode down the mountain. They watched him go. He knows, Nora said. He knows everything. He just never says it. Good man? Yes, Eli said. He is. The magician was skilled. They canceled it jointly, with a letter stating they'd reached a private agreement. The unofficial process took considerably longer. Moving Roan and Shade required 1 borrowed trailer. The Hadley boy who was 20 and knew when to stop talking. 4 hours of negotiation with Roan about trailers specifically, and Eli driving behind the trailer the whole way down, with his hand tight on the wheel and his eyes on the back doors. He told himself he was just making sure they arrived safely. He told himself that the whole way down. The Callaway Ranch had been through a year. You could see it in the fences, the barn, the look of the house, a place where someone had been surviving rather than living. But the land was good. He could see immediately what Thomas had seen in it. The pasture rolled right. The water source was reliable. The soil had the density of something that could hold. He stood in the yard while Nora got Roan and Shade settled. The mountain were visible from here, different angle. You could see the ridge where his cabin sat, just barely, a dark shape against the white. Strange, he thought, to see it from down here. Nora came and stood beside him. You can come down, she said, anytime you want. The calves should see each other. It would be good for them. A pause. And you? Is that an invitation? Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. He looked at her. She looked back. Not with urgency, not with pressure. Just open. A door with the light on. He thought about Vera. He thought she would have liked Nora Callaway, not because they were similar. They weren't. But because Vera had always loved people who were honest about what they were carrying, who carried it without pretending it was light. This part won't last forever. I'll come Tuesday, he said. Tuesday, she said. They left it there. He drove home alone, up the mountain road. Truck cab cold until the heater caught up. The radio doing something quiet he wasn't listening to. He parked. Sat for a moment before going in. The cabin looked the same. Exactly the same. Same timber, same porch, same shape against the trees. But smaller, not diminished. Just the actual size of it. One person space. He'd built it that way after. Cut it down to the scale of what he'd thought his life was going to be. He went inside. The paddock was quiet in the particular way it had only been quiet in April. Before, then Pip made her sound. From the paddock. Her getting cold sound. Her I know you're in there sound. He went out. She was at the gate in the last light. White spot catching the gray of it. She looked at him. He looked at her. I know, he said. Quiet without them. She pushed her nose against his hand. Yeah, he said. Me too. He got her settled. Went inside, sat in the chair by the fire, and that's when it happened, not dramatically. Not with any announcement. Just quietly, the way the truest things happened. Without permission and without warning, he cried, sat in the chair by the fire, and put his hand over his face and cried. For Vera. For Danny. For 6 years of being very far away from himself and calling it strength. For 3 calves in the snow in April and 40 nights on the cabin floor keeping them alive. For Thomas Calloway, who had believed in something and hadn't lived to see it through. For Nora, who had kept going through a year that should have stopped anyone. For the fence he'd been building around himself. Post by post by post, the tears came, and they were not loud, and they were not performed. Just a man in a chair by a fire, alone in his cabin on a mountain, finally letting the weight of 6 years pass through him, rather than holding it in place. Not long, long enough. He's done. He sat with his hands open on his knees, the fire, the wind, gentler tonight. Pip in the paddock, settled, breathing. He thought, Vera. He thought, I'm okay. He thought, I'm going to be okay. Not because everything was resolved. There was still Voss and the investigation and Nora's bank and 100 practical things. But okay in the deeper sense, the sense of, I am still here, still capable of this, of loss and attachment and the risk of caring about things that could be taken. That risk was not the enemy he'd thought it was. For 6 years, simple math, survivor math, except that he'd let 3 calves matter in April before he'd thought it through. And look what that had cost him. Everything. And look what it had given him. Everything. He sat with that. Then he got up, washed his face, put more wood on the fire, made something to eat. Did the ordinary things, which were, he had come to understand, the bravest things showing up for an ordinary evening. Starting over on an ordinary morning, Tuesday. He'd go down Tuesday. That was something. The formal investigation into Garrett Voss took 4 months. It was paperwork and statements and a process that moved at its own pace. Sheriff Dent retired at the end of February. His last official act was submitting the Calloway case documentation to the state attorney's office. In March, Voss reached a settlement. Not an admission. Not a trial. The way powerful men often resolved things. Money and an NDA. And the understanding that it was over. Nora accepted it. Because she was practical. Because she had a ranch to rebuild, and a settlement meant resources. She told Eli on the phone. It's done, she said. I know. It's not enough. No. He said. But it's what you have. A pause. Thomas would have fought it to the end, she said. Thomas didn't have a ranch to save. Longer pause. You're right, she said. He would have understood. Yes, Eli said. He would have. Spring came back to the mountain. April again. A year from the beginning. He rode Copper out along the eastern ridge. Same trail, warmer weather. The clearing where he'd found the cow was just a clearing now. Green was starting at the edges. The mountain didn't hold on to things. He stopped there, stood for a while. He'd kept the coordinates in his notebook. Not because he needed to come back. Just because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be marked. He looked at the clearing. He said quietly, "Thank you, to the cow, maybe. To whatever had arranged this particular trail on this particular morning. To Vera, maybe, who had always had a way of arranging things." He rode back to the cabin. Pip had developed a new habit. Every morning she walked out of the gate and fell into step beside him. Left side, 2 feet back, almost exactly the position Shade had once occupied beside. Not behind, partnership now. He'd noticed it in February, and hadn't said anything, because some things didn't need saying. Some things were just true. On a Tuesday in May, Nora arrived with Roan in the trailer. "He's been impossible for 2 weeks," she said. "He's always impossible. He misses this place." Which is absurd. He always has opinions, I thought. She stopped. If they saw each other sometimes, it might be good for them. He looked at the trailer. At Nora. At Pip, who had appeared at his elbow. "Bring him out," he said. Roan came out like he'd been waiting, stood in the yard, looked around, looked at the cabin, looked at Eli, and then walked over to the fence, where Pip was standing, and put his head over the rail, and just stood there, next to her, baying there. Ellie looked at Nora. She was already looking at him. "You want coffee," he said. "I want coffee," she said. They went inside. He started fixing the fence on the south side of the property in June. Not because it was urgent. The fence was okay. He started widening it, taking out 2 posts, moving them out 6 feet. More room on that side. The Hadley boy came up one Saturday to help, and looked at what Eli was doing, and didn't say anything for a while, which showed real wisdom. "Extending the line?" the boy said finally. "Yep," Eli said. "How far out?" "Far enough." They worked. She came on Tuesday, and then Thursday, and then on a Wednesday, which was new. She didn't explain it. He didn't ask. He just had coffee ready. On a Thursday in July, she brought dinner. They ate on the porch. Summer evening coming down, aspen still green. Pip in the paddock below, lying in the last sun. "Roan's going to need more exposure to different pasture," Nora said, "if he came up here periodically. A week at a time." He looked at the fence he'd been extending. "We'd need to expand the paddock," he said. "I know. More fence line, I know. Could take some time." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He looked at her. She was already looking at him. And something moved between them. Not sudden. Nothing between them had ever been sudden. More like the thing that had been building since the first fence post, the first coffee cup, had reached a place where it didn't need to be named to be known. He reached over, put his hand over hers on the armrest of the porch chair. She turned her hand over, that was all. They sat, the evening light on the mountain, the aspens waiting for October. Pip breathing below them in the last warmth. He thought, this is a beginning, which was terrifying, right? Which 2 years later. October. The aspens on fire, all of them. The whole ridge going gold at once, the way Vera had always catalogued. Tree by tree and then the ridge all at once. Ellie stood on the porch in the morning. New fence line visible from here, extended south, more room. Roan in the lower pasture, a young bull now, carrying himself like someone who'd always known this was coming. He came up on rotation. He had opinions about both places and had made his peace with the arrangement. Shade was at the ranch full-time now. Nora's animal, finally and completely. He'd made that decision the week she moved Roan down. Had simply walked into the trailer behind him and stood there, looking at Eli over the rail. And Eli had understood. Shade had always known who needed watching over most. He'd just been waiting until Eli didn't need it anymore. He stood at Nora's shoulder when she worked, and walked beside her the way he'd once walked beside Eli, and that was correct. That was as it should be. Roan's first calf had been born in February. A heifer out of the ranch's cow. Red-brown, already taking up space with Roan's particular confidence. Thomas would have loved her. Nora had cried then. Not from sadness, from the feeling of something that had been promised, finally arriving. Pip appeared at the porch step. She looked up at Eli. He looked down at her. She was 2 years old and not small, and she'd stopped fitting in the spaces she'd once occupied, and had never quite gotten the update on this. She still tried to tuck her head against his chest, still pressed her nose into the back of his knee at exactly the wrong moment. He fell down once more, in February, lay in the snow looking at the sky. Pip, looking down at him with that expression she'd had since she was 3 days old. Like, are you done? He started laughing, actually laughing, out loud. Alone in the yard in the February cold with a 2-year-old cow standing over him. He hadn't done that in a while. It felt fine. He heard the truck on the road, Nora, coming up. Tuesday, which was still Tuesday, except Tuesday had become Thursday and Saturday, and sometimes just any day that made sense. The fence extension was finished. He'd built a proper second stall in the barn. He hadn't explained any of this out loud. He didn't need to. Some things you just did, some things were just true. He watched the truck come up the trail through the aspens. Gold on gold, the leaves and the morning. The mountain doing what it did in October, which was be exactly itself, completely, without apology. He stepped off the porch. Pip fell in beside him. Left side. 2 feet back, they walked out to meet her. The mountain kept going, the way it always did, the way it always would.